Most people assume youth has the advantage when it comes to attraction, but in real life, many women find themselves naturally drawn to men over 35, and the reason has very little to do with age itself. It's about the habits, mindset, and emotional qualities that many men develop over time. If you understand what those qualities are, you'll realize this isn't really a story about getting older. It's about becoming the kind of man people are naturally drawn to. Topic 1. He stops needing validation, emotional independence. There's a quiet shift that happens to many men after 35. It isn't something you can see in the mirror, and it certainly isn't about getting older. It's the moment a man stops measuring his worth by how much attention he gets from other people, especially women. Instead of chasing approval, he begins making decisions based on his own standards. Ironically, that's often when he becomes far more attractive than he ever was in his 20s. Think about the difference between two men on a first date. One is constantly trying to impress, agreeing with everything she says, checking his phone every few minutes to see if she texted back, and worrying about saying the perfect thing. The other enjoys the conversation, listens carefully, shares his opinions without needing everyone to agree, and leaves at the end of the night perfectly comfortable whether there's a second date or not. Most women can feel that difference almost immediately. Confidence gets attention, but emotional independence creates curiosity because it signals that a man's happiness doesn't depend on someone else's validation. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about attraction. Many men believe that showing more effort automatically creates more interest, when in reality, excessive validation seeking often communicates insecurity instead of confidence. Emotional independence doesn't mean acting cold or pretending not to care. It means caring without becoming emotionally dependent on the outcome. And once a man understands that distinction, another surprising change begins to happen, one that's even more powerful than confidence itself. That brings us to the next reason. Topic 2. His calm becomes more attractive than confidence. Most people think confidence is what women notice first, but over time, many realize that confidence can be loud, performative, and sometimes even fragile. Calm, on the other hand, is much harder to fake. It's the kind of presence that doesn't need to dominate the room because it already feels secure. Many men develop this naturally after years of dealing with setbacks, successes, disappointments, and lessons that simply can't be learned overnight. Imagine a stressful situation, a delayed flight, a restaurant getting the reservation wrong, or an unexpected disagreement during a date. One man immediately becomes irritated, complains about everything, and lets the situation ruin the evening. Another takes a deep breath, smiles, and looks for a solution without making it anyone else's problem. The second man isn't pretending that nothing happened. He's showing that his emotions don't control him. That kind of emotional steadiness creates a sense of safety, and safety is often far more attractive than excitement alone. This doesn't mean a man should suppress his emotions or act like nothing ever bothers him. Quite the opposite. Real strength comes from knowing when to react, when to stay silent, and when a situation simply isn't worth his energy. Men who understand this rarely waste time proving themselves because their behavior speaks louder than their words. And once someone reaches that level of emotional control, another transformation begins to take shape. One that completely changes how attraction develops in the first place. Topic 3. He understands that attraction is built, not chased. One of the biggest mindset shifts that often comes with maturity is realizing that attraction isn't something you force, it's something you cultivate. Younger men are frequently taught that if they just try harder, text more, plan bigger dates, or constantly prove their value, they'll eventually win someone over. But life has a way of teaching a different lesson. Genuine attraction grows through shared experiences, mutual respect, and emotional connection. It can't be negotiated, and it certainly can't be chased into existence. Picture two different approaches after a great first date. One man sends multiple messages the next morning, wondering if she had fun, asking when they're meeting again, and feeling anxious every time a reply takes longer than expected. The other sends a thoughtful message, then goes back to living his own life. He has work to do, friends to see, hobbies to enjoy, and goals he's excited about. He's interested, but he isn't waiting by the phone for his happiness to arrive. Ironically, that balance often creates more intrigue because it shows that his life is already full, and a relationship would be an addition, not the center of his identity. This is where many men completely change the way they think about dating. Instead of asking, "How do I make her like me?" they begin asking, "Are we genuinely compatible?" That single question shifts the entire dynamic. It transforms dating from a performance into a process of discovery, where both people are deciding if they're a good match. And once a man starts seeing relationships through that lens, something else naturally begins to stand out. He no longer relies on romance to make his life interesting, because he's already built a life worth sharing. Topic 4. He usually has a more interesting life. One reason many women are naturally drawn to men over 35 has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with substance. By this stage of life, many men have collected something far more valuable than impressive stories. They've built experiences that shaped who they are. They've traveled, changed careers, started businesses, picked up hobbies, failed at things that mattered, and learned lessons that can't be found in a motivational quote. That gives them something many younger men are still developing: depth. Think about the difference between a conversation fueled by experience and one fueled by the need to impress. One man talks only about what he owns or what he plans to buy. Another casually shares the story of getting lost during a road trip through the American Southwest, learning to sail after turning 40, volunteering with a local community, or training for his first marathon because he wanted to prove something to himself. None of those stories are told to seek admiration. They simply reflect a life that's been lived with curiosity, and that's exactly what makes them engaging. The important lesson isn't that every man needs an extraordinary lifestyle or a passport full of stamps. An interesting life is built through genuine interests, personal growth, meaningful friendships, and the willingness to keep learning long after school is over. Reading books that challenge old beliefs, developing a skill like photography, woodworking, or playing an instrument, joining a hiking group, or simply becoming passionate about something outside of work can completely change the energy a man brings into every conversation. And once a man stops trying to seem interesting and actually becomes interesting, another quality begins to emerge, one that influences every relationship he builds, both romantic and otherwise. If you're enjoying this breakdown and want more practical insights on confidence, relationships, and becoming a stronger, more grounded man, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We're working toward our goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every new subscriber helps us keep creating videos like this. Your support genuinely makes a difference. Topic 5. He knows who he is. One of the clearest differences between a man who is truly matured and one who is still searching for himself is how firmly he knows his own identity. By the time many men reach their late 30s, they've spent enough years succeeding, failing, changing directions, and reevaluating priorities to understand what actually matters to them. They no longer feel the need to reshape their personality just to fit into someone else's expectations. That quiet certainty is incredibly noticeable because authenticity is much harder to imitate than confidence. You can often see this in small, everyday moments. A younger man might agree with opinions he doesn't really share just to avoid conflict or make a good impression. A more grounded man is perfectly comfortable saying, "I see it differently," without turning it into an argument or feeling threatened if someone disagrees. He doesn't need everyone in the room to approve of him, because his self-worth isn't being decided in real time. Ironically, that willingness to be genuine makes him easier to trust. People know where he stands, and that consistency creates a sense of emotional stability that's difficult to fake. Knowing who you are also means knowing what you will and won't accept. It means setting healthy boundaries without guilt, protecting your time, and recognizing that saying no to the wrong situations often creates space for the right ones. A man who respects his own values naturally attracts people who respect them too, because he isn't constantly negotiating his identity to keep others comfortable. And once someone reaches that level of self-awareness, another important shift begins to happen. He no longer mistakes generosity for self-sacrifice, and that distinction changes the entire dynamic of how he approaches relationships. Topic 6. He doesn't confuse kindness with desperation. One of the most valuable lessons many men learn with age is that kindness and desperation are not the same thing. When they're younger, it's common to believe that being available all the time, constantly giving compliments, buying expensive gifts, or always putting someone else's needs first will naturally create attraction. But experience teaches a different lesson. Genuine kindness comes from abundance. Desperation comes from fear, the fear of losing someone's attention, missing an opportunity, or not feeling good enough on your own. Imagine a simple situation after a disagreement in a relationship. One man immediately apologizes, even when he hasn't done anything wrong, just to avoid tension. He ignores his own feelings because he's terrified of creating distance. Another man stays respectful, listens carefully, and is willing to admit when he's made a mistake, but he also isn't afraid to calmly explain his perspective. He understands that a healthy relationship isn't built on one person constantly giving in. It's built on mutual respect, honest communication, and emotional balance. That difference may seem subtle, but it completely changes the way he's perceived. Real generosity has boundaries. A mature man enjoys making someone feel appreciated because it reflects who he is, not because he's trying to earn affection in return. He can be thoughtful without expecting a reward, supportive without losing himself, and affectionate without becoming emotionally dependent. That balance creates a relationship where both people choose each other freely instead of one person constantly trying to prove their worth. And when a man reaches that point, he begins to discover the biggest secret behind lasting attraction, something that has almost nothing to do with age and everything to do with the person he's become. Topic 7. Age isn't the advantage. Self-mastery. After hearing all these reasons, it's easy to walk away with the wrong conclusion. Some men might think that turning 35 is the moment everything magically changes, but that's never been the real message. Age doesn't automatically make anyone more attractive. It simply gives a person more opportunities to develop qualities that can't be rushed: emotional control, resilience, confidence, patience, and a clearer sense of purpose. Time is only valuable if it's used to grow. Think about the men you've probably met throughout your life. There are 25-year-olds who carry themselves with remarkable maturity, take responsibility for their actions, communicate with confidence, and have already built meaningful lives. At the same time, there are men in their 40s or 50s who are still chasing validation, avoiding accountability, and reacting emotionally to every setback. The calendar alone doesn't create wisdom. The choices someone makes year after year are what shape the man they eventually become. That's why the women who are drawn to men over 35 often aren't responding to the number itself. They're responding to what that number frequently represents. A man who has learned from failure instead of becoming bitter. A man who has built a life instead of waiting for someone else to complete it. A man who values himself enough to offer his time, attention, and commitment intentionally rather than desperately. Those qualities are available to any man willing to develop them, regardless of his age. And once that realization sinks in, dating stops feeling like a competition against younger men and starts becoming something much more powerful. The natural result of becoming the kind of man people genuinely want to be around. Conclusion. At the end of the day, the biggest advantage isn't being over 35. It's becoming the kind of man who keeps growing, learning, and improving with every stage of life. The qualities we've talked about today aren't reserved for a certain age. They're built through choices, discipline, and the willingness to become emotionally stronger, more self-aware, and more intentional in the way you live. That's the kind of growth that naturally changes how people see you, including the women you meet. Now I'd like to hear from you. Which of these 7 reasons do you think has the biggest impact, and is there another one you believe deserves to be on this list? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and I'd love to know your perspective. If you found value in this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos on confidence, relationships, and personal growth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.